So today, what I'm going to present to you is our Building Bridges discussion, and it really is a discussion that's been a work of love for myself and for Carlene and for the Animal Welfare Committee of the DVM. And it really is developing those good relationships between veterinarians and animal care and also animal control agencies. And there is a difference, as you all know, between an animal care or a welfare or a humane society or a rescue group and a shelter. And trying to get these pieces together in the same room to talk and to work together. And that has been something that I have been pursuing for the last several years of my life. So really, when we look at something and we say, okay, we want to address a problem, we're all scientists by nature, and so for us, particularly the veterinarians, we look at it and we like to know, what is it? What is the problem? Well, the problem is really quite simple, guys. The problem is that the number of homeless animals across the United States is astounding, okay? In Michigan, the numbers are astounding, okay? Here are some numbers for you, and I'll give you a little bit of history. This has been kind of whittled down to some key bullet points, but there's some facts behind there that I like to elucidate as I go through this. And the first is that the national euthanasia average for companion animals, and this is out of a study or an article written by Merritt Clifton in 2004. He said at that point in time, the national euthanasia statistics for companion animals were 4.9 million. Now you can pick up other studies from elsewhere, you can pick up other numbers from elsewhere. More recent, 2008, 2009, 2010, those numbers are still right around that 5 million mark, okay? And what's really important about that number is it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed since about 1995, okay? There were some key, when you look further at some of the historical information that's out there, there were some key events that occurred in terms of making numbers change. And at one point, you know, you look at it and you say 5 million is a big number. But at one point, not so long ago, about 30 years ago, that number was about 25 million. So we've had a big decrease in the number of euthanasia. Key events have occurred. You know, the move to spay dogs, the move for addressing community/feral cats, no matter where you weigh in on that argument. The impetus of certain societal events have had an impact. One of the things that was interesting that when I was looking at this, that sort of as an aside, is that when you look at the numbers, that there was a blip in this century, so in the 21st century. Do you know when that blip was? It was 9/11. And at that point, we blipped up a little bit because monies to go to animal welfare type of groups or groups that were intervening for animals were diverted because of the 9/11 catastrophe, because the pot moved elsewhere. It moved to humans, rightly so. So here are some other facts that you really need to know, and they're here. 93% of all pit bull type dogs that enter a shelter are euthanized. To me, I grew up on a farm, so it's a typical supply and demand kind of issue. There's more supply than there is demand for pit bulls. There's a lot of people, aren't there, Shereen, out there breeding pit bulls for lots of reasons that may or may not, mostly may not, be appropriate. 3 out of 4 cats are euthanized when they enter a shelter. That one I'm sure Steve Bailey doesn't like much, but we see a lot of cats euthanized. Again, supply and demand. For one of the most incredible statements that I heard was this last statement. I heard that, I think it was last year at the Midwest Veterinary Conference, and this was by Kate Hurley. She said the greatest predictive indicator for death for a cat is to enter a shelter. And as veterinarians, she went on to elucidate that, and she said, as veterinarians, if we were dealing with a medical condition that caused that type of mortality, we would be appalled, and we would be doing everything we could to address that medical condition. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line really, guys, is 4 million animals are at risk of being euthanized across the nation. Furthermore, about 200,000 of those animals reside in Michigan. There are 164 shelters. Actually, there's 165 now that report to the Michigan Department of Ag. And the numbers show that there are 200,000 plus animals entering those shelters. But really, more importantly, behind every one of those numbers, there's a wet nose. So we know as veterinarians that there are additional problems, and these are the problems that fall within our spectrum, and it's important that we put these out there, particularly not when I'm talking to you all, but when we're talking to shelters and to rescues. You know, the additional problems that we're seeing within our community is that there's a lack of preventative pet health care, that there are many pets that are not receiving care at all. You know, there's a whole group of animals that are unserved, and people with those animals. We know that diseases are increasing. We're seeing more dental disease. We're seeing more otitis. We're seeing more diabetes. And we know that there is a reduced compliance for wellness types of procedures, such as the heartworm test. And finally, we know that our pets are getting fatter. So we have a lot of problems here. And we need to look at this and say, who is it? Who is it that can make a difference for these problems? And sometimes you almost have to take it back a step and say, let's take it really, really to the basics. And the basic problem is that the people, or the basic solution is that the people that can make the biggest impact have already been identified, but we need to state them very clearly. It's us, it's the veterinarians, it's shelter staff, and it's animal rescues. So let's talk about the players a little bit. Veterinarians, we know who we are, right? Maybe sometimes we don't do the greatest job communicating who we are, but we really are the experts in veterinary medicine and in animal care. And we have an advanced education. We spend a lot of time and money to do our profession. That's who we are. Now, who are the animal rescuers? You guys, most of you, particularly if you're in companion animal medicine, have dealt with the rescuers. And animal rescuers are really animal advocates who have a wealth of practical knowledge and are well educated on local issues. Many times they're much more educated, particularly the people who are a little more politically savvy. They're much more educated on what's going on in terms of animal issues in their local, in their communities, and they're willing to advocate. And certainly there are individuals within that spectrum or that group who are very, very educated at the state level. And I found out initially, before I became more involved in the committees that I serve on, that they were much more educated about what was going on than I was. Shelters. You guys know that shelters, there really are two types of shelters, right? There's the open admission shelter, and there's a limited admission facility. The role of both, no matter which one they are, and we know the open admission is the classic high kill shelter. It's the shelter who cannot turn animals away, okay? And so what happens if you can't turn an animal away, a stray, that means you become obligated to look for another outcome. Most of our county shelters are that type of shelter. That's what we are. That means we cannot take the dog in or a cat in and hold them indefinitely because there's another animal waiting for that physical space. Okay? That's an open admission. A limited admission has the ability to say no. You know? And the classic example is more your Humane Society. And certainly there are humane societies that carry contracts with animal control, the service to provide for the animals that the animal control agencies bring in. So they're kind of living in both worlds. So we've identified who the players are. And so now really we need to look at it and say, we need to figure out a way to really help form good relationships with these players, with the veterinarians, with the shelter, and with the rescue group. It's easy to say, it's not so easy to do, sitting in that position. And I think certainly most of you around the table have had some experience, and you know it's not easy to do. But you have to back up a step, and you have to look at it and say, let's identify some common goals. Let's look at what the realities are for each group. Let's clarify some of the misunderstandings. And let's see if we can identify perceptions and vocabulary that are barriers to our understanding. We need to work to promote trust through mutual understanding and respect. And we need to identify examples of successful collaborative relationships. And I will tell you it's doable. We've done it. We've done it in Jackson. We've done it in part thanks to Missy. So what do we have in common? Really, what we have in common is all three groups have an empathy for animals. And all three groups, really the main focus of what that group is doing is focusing on the animals. And believe it or not, all three groups need to be able to support themselves financially. So the problem is, really though, we've got a lot of things in common, but the problem is we don't work well together. We don't work well together because our motivations are different. We're coming from a different point on the continuum. Our realities are different, and we're not recognizing what we have in common. And the result is triangulation. You guys remember this from psychology? This old triangle, the victim, persecutor, rescuer. It's triangulation. Well, let's substitute that. I like this. I want you guys, I don't know, there it is. See that? Victim, veterinarian. Yeah, we're up here at the top. That's my truism. Veterinarian, shelter staff, animal rescuer. And like any triangle, the relationship changes. You know, who you're aligning with changes. It's a dynamic type of relationship. So let's talk about us. We always like to talk about us. It is all about us, right? So let's talk about the veterinarians. What do veterinarians want to do? Really what we want to do is we want to be able to support ourselves practicing what we're trained to do, which is veterinary medicine, right? It's real simple. It's not an inappropriate desire to have. We opted for this profession because we liked animals and we wanted to do this. We wanted to do this profession. We wanted to, for me personally, I wanted to practice medicine, but I wanted to practice medicine on animals. I had no interest in treating humans. I had interest in interacting with humans, with their animals, but not in treating humans. I wanted to work on animals. And we know we have to have great communication skills. We all get this service from our clients. Boy, I wish my human doctor spent as much time explaining to me what you've just explained to me about myself. We're good at it. We're really, really good at it. And we are a great resource of medical knowledge. And sometimes we forget that. I think veterinarians were kind of an interesting group. I think we're a very humble group in comparison to some of our other colleagues who are physicians or dentists. We're much more humble and much more down to earth. So let's talk about what the veterinarian's reality is. Okay. This one blows me away, and when I talk to the students, they all sit there with their eyes like this, you know. But they know. Today's graduate is typically about $146,000 in debt upon graduation. That blows me away. That's a national average. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, particularly when you know what we make. The starting salary nationally is about $66,000. And so what does that translate to? That translates to that we're worried about debt. We're worried about living expenses and supporting ourselves, and many times supporting our staff. What is it that we miss? You know, we're very, very good at practicing veterinary medicine. We're very, very good at interacting with the individual client and educating them. But sometimes what we miss is the larger picture of what's going on in the world around us, almost that animal welfare aspect. We're missing the opportunity to be a resource to our clients. And we're missing it because we don't know the companion animal homeless numbers. Now I have to tell you, I'm extrapolating that for myself because I didn't know what the numbers were until I started really looking at it. And when I talk to my colleagues, I say, do you know what the numbers are? No, not really. So I don't think I was unique. we're not aware either of what's going on in the shelters in our communities. You know, when I first started going into Jackson County, I went in. A friend of mine, the friend that I formed the rescue with, we went into Jackson County. She's from Jackson County. She said, "Come to the shelter with me." She had been in the vernacular pulling dogs from there. So I said, "Okay, I'll go." And I went in and I started talking to the staff, and I'm like, "Okay, so you have a veterinarian?" "Yeah, we have a veterinarian on record." "And so you see your veterinarian how often?" "Oh no, the veterinarian doesn't come here." And it was like, what? They don't come here? You know, there's not a veterinarian coming into your shelter? And then I started finding out that that's more the norm than the exception, particularly for the smaller shelters. You know, you'll have a veterinarian of record, but you don't necessarily have access to that veterinarian. And so there's animals in the shelter that are not receiving care. And I wasn't aware of that. I started volunteering there once a week. I drive 60 miles and go there and volunteer once a week. Because I felt like they needed somebody doing something. And so what happens is we're not engaged in that. We may not be engaged in what's going on in the shelter, and that's not our fault. We're busy people. We're trying to support ourselves. We're trying to take care of our clients. When I get really frustrated, I'll say, you know, I'll have somebody complain that I wasn't accessible. I still practice a little bit of private practice too, and I'll have somebody complain. I have a small segment of clients that still follow me around, and they'll be upset that they don't have access to me. Well, you know, I'm a person with a whole lot of life elsewhere, and my comment is always, when you pay for my degree, you can have 24-hour access. I never say that to them because I want them to come back. But I'm thinking that in my head, boundary that I'm setting, and it's true for most of us. We are really stretched thin, and so sometimes we don't have time to be engaged in the community activities, particularly if we have children and we're involved in their community activities, or, you know, which now that my daughter's older, I have a little more time. And so we don't have time to be engaged as a resource for community activities that have to do with animal well-being. You know? And so we're not necessarily, that's a double negative, but we aren't usually sitting on boards of rescue groups or shelters or humane societies. And frankly, for me, there are some places like, man, I am just tired of being a veterinarian. So what concerns do we have as veterinarians when it comes to the other players that are at the table, the rescues and the shelters? And I'm voicing my concerns, and I will tell you, I already heard somebody go, huh. So I think there must be some agreement with it. The first one drives me bonkers. Absolutely drives me crazy. People are practicing medicine without a license. And we all know what that means. And to me, the classic example is the rescue group that adopts out the dog or the cat at an event. You know, they're showing at PetSmart, and I hear them as I'm walking through the store say, come back in 2 weeks and I'll revaccinate your dog. Really? Huh. That doesn't sit well. That happens a lot. Or they adopt out the cat. And we all know the rule of thumb with cats. You put it in a carrier, you barely get it out to the car, and it sneezes. You know, that's what a cat does, you know. And so then the rescue group is saying, the cat sneezes, call me back and I'll send you some antibiotics. Oh, okay. What they're doing, they're not encouraging these adopters to develop a relationship with us. They're doing our job. And of course, we get angry about it. We have a right to be angry about it. And in addition, sometimes they minimize our knowledge. Or they make derogatory comments about us, or our practices, or our profession overall. I have been at animal welfare meetings where I wanted to cover my name tag because they've been non-veterinary, they've been more rescue shelter oriented, because I've sat in lunch and heard the veterinarian being thrown under the bus. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm one of those people. But we're not innocent in this either, guys, right? I mean, We have to understand that sometimes we contribute to miscommunication because we demean shelters and rescues. My other favorite is, think about this one. Okay, so we say, I'm in a room, I have a client, they say, I'm thinking about getting a new puppy. Where should I get it from? Well, you know, you think, you stop, you think, you say, don't get it from the pet store. Don't get it from a rescue group. Don't go to a shelter. You're going to get parvovirus from either of those, or kennel cough. Don't go to a backyard breeder. If you go to a reputable breeder, make sure they're doing this, 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 and this. And you stop. And if you look at the whole list, what have you done? Is there any place they can get a pet from? If they don't have a pet, are they going to come see you? And are they going to pay you to see you? You know, we have to really take it and look at it and say, I want them to have a pet. I want them to have a pet from the most reputable resource possible. Maybe I need to do my due diligence and have some options for them. Maybe I need to know that they're doing things as well as they can at Jackson County Animal Shelter or Paws Pet Rescue, and say, these are groups that are doing the best they can, but understand things happen. The other one that really bugs me is that many times we appear to be self-serving, and we get the image of being the money-grubbing veterinarian. And all of us here know the best kept secret in the world is that if I took a poll around this table, I would be surprised if any of you who are in companion animal, and probably some of you in the food animal, large animal realm as well, would say to me, I have never done anything pro bono. But we do things pro bono and we don't tell people, right? And why don't we tell people? You betcha. We don't want to pound it on our doors saying, I heard you did this for so-and-so. And so I feel like sometimes I'm in an AA meeting and we're all staying in our anonymity with this. You know, we're not sharing that we're doing this because we don't want to be overwhelmed. And because I think in general we're really soft-hearted individuals, and we have a hard time saying no. So we just don't want to be in the position of having to say no. So because people don't know that, they assume that we're money grubbing. You know, I can give you an example of an emergency clinic in Novi. Police showed up with a little Shih Tzu. Police saw the dog thrown out of the car. Okay. They brought the dog in, it was a Friday. They kept the dog over the weekend, contacted us, said, you know, meaning the emergency clinic, can you guys take this dog? We did some talking back and forth. They ultrasounded the dog, they x-rayed the dog, they did blood work on the dog. The dog came to us, the dog got a dental at Baker College where I teach, went into another rescue and was rehomed. Nobody knows that. Nobody knows that story in terms of the general public because the emergency clinic doesn't want that out there. So what can we do? What can we do to really improve the relationship between rescues and shelters? Really, it's very simple. I think looking at it and saying, do you have time and can you do some volunteer work with one of these groups? Community shelter would be my choice. Ingham County did some very nice work with vaccine and heartworm clinics in Ingham County Animal Shelter, where they actually put on vaccine and heartworm clinics for a nominal fee to some of their underserved folks. And the veterinarians were asked to volunteer, and veterinarians did volunteer. Both Missy and I volunteered at some of their events. And local veterinarians volunteered. It was a way to promote wellness, to talk to these people about vaccinating some of these people who don't know what they don't know. And it was a chance for veterinarians to interact with these people and be, more importantly, to be on the forefront of doing something, doing the right thing just because it's the right thing. Offer free pet checkups with the dogs and cats that come from a rescue or a shelter. That goes really, really a long way. If you give them that little voucher that says, go have a checkup. we get those out, and guess what? I put skin sutures in on my space. I don't need to, but I put them in because I'm hoping those animals will go see a veterinarian to have the sutures out. So let's shift gears and let's talk about the rescue for a little bit. And let's talk about who the rescuer is and what their motivations are. So let's start with their motivations first. They really, really have a motivation to help individual animals. They will take up a cause for an individual animal and take it, almost to the limit. Furthermore, they're aware of the numbers of homeless animals, and they want to reduce those numbers. These are folks that are going into shelters, or if they're not going into shelters, they're at least well-versed about what's going on in the shelters, or they think they're well-versed. They will work tirelessly for animals, and they are active advocates for their well-being. So what does the animal rescuer look like? Well, guess what? I'm a middle-aged woman. Classic of who it is. It is frequently someone like me, and they come from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. They typically have a strong empathy for the plight of homeless animals. And I was real struck by that. I was at the IMPLOG conference, and there was a two-hour session on compassion fatigue, and it was interesting sitting at that conference and watching the people in the audience and the amount of raw emotion in terms of the empathy. It's very, very heightened. And you guys know who I'm talking about. We call them the rescue crews, right? Yeah. They are often members, but not always, members of 501c3s. And notice I said that they are often members of 501c3s. And what they miss when they say, I'm a member of a 501c3 or I'm a member of a nonprofit, they miss the business part of that statement. And so they're often really, really working very hard to keep themselves self-sustaining. They're literally on the edge frequently. This is one of the dogs we worked with at Jackson County. His name is Toby. Toby had tetanus. Toby had been picked up on a Friday night by one of the sheriff's department and taken to Gay Animal Hospital. And he had a huge necrotic laceration on his chest. They kept him overnight, and one of the doctors the next day said, I'm going to sedate him and debride that wound. He didn't look like this at the time. So she sedated him. Her colleague said, why are you going to do that? He's going to go to the shelter and just be euthanized anyway. And she said, because it's the right thing. So she debrided the wound, sutured it up. The dog was transferred to us, to Jackson County on Monday. On Tuesday, when I walked the floors, he looked like this. So we started the appropriate treatment for tetanus. Blackman Animal Hospital donated tetanus antitoxin to us. We treated him with that. We had him at the shelter 3 weeks. We're the high kill shelter guys. His clock was ticking. He should have been killed long before that. We had him there for 3 weeks. Then he went to our rescue for 2 weeks. He went to another rescue after that and is now living in a home that is his permanent home. It's a good example of working together. I've given you a couple already. So let's talk about things rescues should do to improve relationships with veterinarians in shelters. What I encourage rescues to do, and it was very interesting at IMPA because some of the folks got a little defensive, I encourage them to develop a relationship with a local shelter. Pick a shelter. That's actually what we did with the rescue we formed. It's a very small rescue, and our mandate is to work with Jackson County Shelter. And the goal is to make a commitment to one shelter and to make a commitment to increase their live outcomes. The second thing that I think that rescues really need to do, or I encourage rescues to do, promote the local veterinarian. And there are ways that you can promote the veterinarian and still keep yourself viable. One of the ways, do you guys know about Pet Point? Anybody know about Pet Point in here besides Shireen and maybe Lori? No? Never heard of it. It's interesting. In the sheltering world, there are multiple programs out there. They're virtual programs. They're the computer. And basically, it's a way you can track. And there's medical modules. And there are modules in terms of tracking your animals, etc. There's Chameleon, there's Shelter Buddies. There's this one. This is the one I'm familiar with. It's the one I've worked with. Part of the allure of that program for me was that it has microchips. And attached to those microchips is 30 days worth of free pet insurance to the new adopter. It's their marketing niche. They're actually a pet insurance company. And so they've developed this symbiotic relationship with shelters and rescues where you buy the microchips for approximately $6. You microchip the animal, you register that animal as the animal is adopted through their program. They email the new adopter and they provide insurance up to $750 with a $75 deductible for the first month that that person owns them, that animal, okay? Now what they're going to do is after that they're going to market and market and market. You know, the customer, and at that point they are their customer, is going to get an email asking them to opt in to their pet insurance. What I liked about this was that it helps to bridge that 1 month gap between adopting an animal and not really feeling connected to that animal and actually feeling like that animal is a part of your home. And it's also, when you have that, and speaking now as somebody who has a rescue, and this year we've adopted about 250 animals to date, our small rescue, all from the, virtually all from the shelter. What it does, it gives me peace of mind. I know if that animal, if that cat breaks with you or I, that insurance is there. You know, we haven't had a lot of claims with our insurance. Our claims have been honored. Now, program's not easy to work. I'll tell you that. I work it, and I'm the one tapping in the data. But it's a great boon because it's very difficult. Imagine being in my position where you're a private practitioner. You work at the shelter, and you're the shelter medicine vet, and you're sending animals out, and your inclination, if somebody calls and says, I have an issue, is to want to intervene. And instead, I don't do the adoptions. Instead, I have the person who's doing the adoptions say, this is the step you need to take. You need to go see your veterinarian. When we do the adoptions, we say, we encourage them, make an appointment with a veterinarian. You need to have a wellness exam. Yes, we've done all this. Our veterinarian's involved. Yes, she did the surgery, she did the exam. You still need a relationship. This animal needs continued vaccines, which are not covered, by the way, with this insurance. But we are not going to continue to do vaccines for it. Okay? So, we already know this, and I'm just going to briefly go through this list. Things rescues should not do. And again, this is more when I'm speaking to the rescue groups. Don't give medications out once the animal's been adopted. You know, have a plan, have a reasonable plan, like Pet Point or whatever. You know, some form of insurance, some way to help that adopter bridge that gap without violating the veterinarian's rights and their trust. And similarly, don't vaccinate them once they've been adopted. Don't denigrate the local shelter, don't put them down, don't talk about everything they're doing wrong. Remember, a local shelter, it's a whole different ballgame. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of like being a large animal veterinarian. We're dealing with populations here. Yes, we're dealing with individuals and their companion animals, but we're dealing with population kind of problems and the greater good for the population. So for the rescuer to denigrate what we're doing, they don't walk in our shoes, okay? And similarly, don't belittle the veterinarian and make small of their resource, what they are as a resource, their knowledge base. And finally, don't bring puppies and dogs from other states. We really do have enough dogs in Michigan. We really do. You know, there's plenty. So let's talk about the shelter. Let's change gear and go to the last group. Shelters. What really are shelters? They are a place where we put homeless, stray, lost, and cruelty victim animals, usually companion. It's a place to house that group of animals, okay? And as I've said, they can be open admission or limited admission. And unfortunately, many times, particularly when you're in open admission shelter, the perception may be that the shelter just wants to euthanize those animals as soon as possible. I had a woman who's working with the shelter tell me that she thought that the dogs, the first time I got her to go in there, she said, I thought they were going to be time-stamped. And she's kidding, but she wasn't really, you know, not literally, but figuratively. That they, you know, that as soon as their time, their stray time was up, they were done. You know, that their outcome was achieved, and that outcome was going to be euthanasia. And yes, that may be what the outcome is, but that doesn't mean that that's where we're trying to track everybody. We're tracking every animal. The reality is that it's kind of like the show First 48. Every animal, when it hits the door, is being tracked, whether you realize it or not. And what we're trying to do is broaden the definition of what's being tracked towards a positive outcome, both as individual shelters, and I think as a culture, we're trying to track that way. But the reality is we can't house them all. You know, we can't house all of them on an indefinite basis. So euthanasia does become necessary. So really, the mission statement of a shelter is to help animals in need and to advocate for their well-being until an outcome is achieved. We have a close relationship with Baker College Jackson, and they laugh. As I said, when they first were working with the shelter, they had lots of things they could teach their students, because Baker's mandate is that they don't, they only do things to animals that animals need in their teaching program for the vet techs. And so when they were initially working with the shelter, they had lots of skin scrapes. Well, they can't work with those animals until the animals belong to the county legally, which means they've gone through the stray hold, which by the time you do all the math, really works out to be about a week. And so usually by the time they get them, we've got their skin straightened up. And so they're not getting their skin scrapes. You know, they laugh about how much healthier the animals look and how much less their students are learning. I like this picture. This is one of our animal control officers, and in Jackson we're a little bit different than some of the other counties because animal control falls under the sheriff and the shelter falls under the health department. But what I point out to people is, yeah, she's an animal control officer, and it looks like she might be holding what we would probably call lab mixes, but that are probably really little itty-bitty kitties, you know. And furthermore, I see no horns on that woman's head, okay? The look on her face is the typical look of pure joy about having two puppies with puppy breath right next to your nose. Let me talk to you a little bit about the shelter staff and what I see. The shelter staff really has a tough job, guys. They frequently suffer from compassion fatigue, and many times that manifests in different ways. One of the most frequent ways we see is that it's expressed as a dislike for human beings. What you may or may not know is that they frequently are asked to assist or are the certified euthanasia technicians. And in Michigan, to be certified as a euthanasia technician, that means 8 hours of training by a veterinarian to perform euthanasia and approval by the state. And they, many times, or maybe, at least in our shelter, they may be making decisions about which animals are being euthanized. And again, I think that's more commonplace in the smaller shelters where there aren't as many folks in this many layers. So what can shelters do about what they're dealing with? And understand many times they're understaffed too. How can shelters improve the veterinarian rescue shelter relationship? Really, they can encourage individuals who adopt those animals to follow up with a veterinarian. Seeing a theme here, you know? Once again, we're talking the triangle. Let's encourage that. Shelters can do that same pet insurance kind of algorithm as well. We don't. I wish we did. The rescue does. Vaccinate on intake, that was a huge one, and it was a struggle in our county to get that one in place. Provide adequate medical care and provide adequate housing. The last one is one we're working on now real actively. We've been fortunate because we've been getting a little bit of advice and input from Michigan Humane, and we're very grateful for that. But providing behavioral enrichment, particularly if that animal's there for a longer period of time. This one makes me crazy, and I see my staff do it. If there's one thing I could fault my staff with, it's sometimes being inconsistent. Things shelters should not do. Do not make a promise to a rescuer or an individual and then not follow through with it. Whether it's, yes, you can have this animal and the rescue group has driven 3 hours for this Brittany Spaniel, and oh, I just adopted it. No, you made a promise. You need those folks to come back. You need to follow through. You need not to adopt it out, even though you really like the money from it. You need not to adopt it out. You need to keep your commitment. And sometimes, because of the compassion fatigue, again, my interpretation, we get some infighting going on, and that infighting can result in becoming a deterrent to a live outcome for an animal. The focus needs to be on saving the animal, getting the animal out, if the animal is an animal that is a viable candidate. And along those same lines, not only internally within the group, but when working with the public, sometimes these folks aren't focused on communicating well what the shelter rules are. You know, walking up to somebody who's walking a floor and they're looking at it and they're seeing all these animals, and if they're all hodgepodge together, and animals that are available, meaning that the stray hold is over and they now belong to the county, and animals that are not available yet are all mixed together, explaining to that potential adopter how to read a card and know if that animal's available. And again, I really, really do not like to hear shelters demean either veterinarians or rescues to potential adopters. And I have to say, at least in our shelter, it's very rare for the shelter to demean a veterinarian. It may demean a rescue here and there, but not a veterinarian. At least not when I'm around. So let's kind of wrap this up and let's talk about sort of the common points here. And let's talk about what all three groups have in common. Because we talked about it at the beginning, but I want to reintroduce those ideas again. Really, all three groups have a heightened empathy for animals. And I don't think any of us have a problem with a buy-in on that. All three groups have a significant portion of their day invested in the care and well-being of animals. And none of these individuals wish to euthanize animals. Some may be obligated to do euthanasia, and some may be more obligated than others to perform euthanasia. But nobody wants to euthanize an animal. Most have experienced compassion fatigue associated with their quest. And finally, the point that I really like to make is all of us, or all of them, have lives independent of animal care. And they need, or we need, a little healthy balance in that. So where do we go from here? This is a real nice talk. We talked about a lot of points, but really, where do we go from here? We must begin to really dialogue in areas that are common ground. And that's the best place to start, is where there is common ground. And all three groups need to cease to criticize one another. It's real easy to criticize, and until you've been where I've been, don't criticize me about what I'm doing. You don't know all the facts. Gather the facts. Start a conversation. We should consider attending educational venues that support the common goal. So here are some educational opportunities that are out there. The MVMA Animal Welfare Conference, which was in November 19th. Fantastic. It's very good. Mixture of small and large animal. The Michigan Partnership for Animal Welfare Conference, the MPAW conference, that was just last week, December 1st. Midwest Veterinary Conference Shelter Track is incredible. It is an incredible meeting, 30+ hours in scenic Columbus, Ohio in February. It does not get much better than that. Okay? You could go to Western states or you could go to the Midwest. Tough decision. And then finally, the Prairie States Animal Welfare Conference. That's in June, and it's in usually in Illinois. I have not been to that one. I know, Shireen, you have, haven't you? You haven't been either? Yeah, I've heard great stuff about it. You know. Conferences are great, but it takes more than going and getting educated. Really, we need to improve our relationships for the groups, between the groups, so that we can benefit the homeless pets. So we really need to focus on the common goals, and we need to get together, make a call, say, let's meet. It's possible, it's doable, it's been done in Jackson at many, many levels. And when you get together, whether it's on the phone or in person, you gotta check the egos and the attitudes at the door. You gotta communicate about what your common goals are. If you can sit down and say, here's what we have in common. I keep coming back to Missy. Missy, and she is the driver of one of our success stories. There was a project that went on in Jackson County in, I think it was July. And it was called the Jackson County Cat Project. Missy was the driver for it. Missy was the driver for it. Missy is a private practitioner. She was the driver for it. It wasn't me. It was Missy. I said that enough now, I think. The goal was to spay and neuter 100 cats in a day at the Humane Society and the Jackson County Animal Shelter. 100 cats for people who needed that service. Missy got everything together. She spent an incredible amount of time. She took all the calls. She got 4 crazy veterinarians to cut, 5 I guess, actually 5. And she cajoled vaccines out of folks. She got a whole bunch of people to volunteer to staff this, both technicians and just straight volunteers to handle the paperwork. And it was an incredible success. Lots of press, lots of positive things, lots of positive impact. The other thing that to me personally, and I'm going to go ahead and say this, that was very rewarding was she got 2 groups of people who don't play nicely at the table to make a commitment to a common goal. And in most, I don't think we're unique, but the county shelter and the Humane Society, we don't play well together. You know, we have a sort of little bit of a tense relationship, but she got us there and she got us talking and got us to agree. She got us to do sort of mental memorandum of understanding that this was one event, it was discreet, and we were going to make it happen, and it did. Okay. It's an example of thinking outside of the box. And I will tell you, everybody voiced their concerns, and there were some legitimate concerns, including how it would impact donors for the Humane Society, including how we were going to pull it off with the Board of Commissioners for the shelter. So, kind of already set this up for you. How do you move forward from here? What I'm hoping to do is motivate you all to go out and do this. Really, to move forward, what you need to do is pick up the phone and make the call. You can do it as a private practitioner, you can do it as a shelter veterinarian, you can do it as a rescuer. You need to pick up the call and have a plan when you make that call. You know? And what you're hoping to do is get the people who are, that you need buy-in from to come to an initial meeting. And hold it maybe at your local animal care or control agency and with local veterinarians involved. And trust me guys, you're not going to get everybody to buy in the veterinary community. And then when you've done that once and you've had a meeting, hold a second meeting at an opposite site, sort of going into enemy territory. Let's talk about what to do at the first meeting. You really need to identify who the key stakeholders are and what the barriers are to the success. You know, I kind of gave you some examples in our own experience. Define the concerns. Define the concerns that each group has and share each other's mission. You know, sometimes if you take it back and say, what's our mission? You can overcome some of the concerns. These are not short meetings. You've got to plan to be there several hours, maybe 3 to 4. And when you're there, you need to provide existing data. That's part of the reason I give you the handout that I sent around. The existing data is there, it's real, it's tangible. We as veterinarians, or at least I do, and I think I'm not unique, like numbers. It makes it more real. When you start sharing the data and what's going on, particularly in your own community, it makes it much more real. When you can look at it and say, the population in Jackson County is 167,000, here's the demographics, here's how many cats are going to be born in this county. If you do the math based on this algorithm, it can really bring you back to what's the problem here. So when you share that data, then hopefully what you can do is you can look at it and say, let's get a consensus. Let's make an agreement to work together. And then sign an agreement of mutual respect, maybe put it to paper. Get a second meeting and open your doors and tell your stories. Promote the initiative and the tactics that you're going to use. And get buy-in. And again, I'm stating it again for you guys, get everyone to sign that agreement. Invite everybody. Get the local vets, shelter executives, staff, industry. Try to get everybody there. And before you leave that second meeting, assign roles and responsibilities. And furthermore, develop a timeline and a budget. The timeline is critical. If you know that you're going to do this July 9th, and that by this date, this is going to be done, and by this date, this is going to be done. If you just say, let's do this, it's never going to happen. You've got to define a timeline, and you've got to be able to say, it's going to cost me this much money for anesthesia. Where is it going to come from? I know I'm getting the veterinary services for free. I know I've got the facilities lined up. How am I going to get the anesthetic? How much is it going to cost? Who can I ask for this? Who can I tap for the rabies vaccines? Am I going to have to pay for those? Will they be donated? Get all that together, and then you got to regroup and recap. And you do that multiple times. Catalyst, I'm sure you guys have heard about Catalyst with Carly. Catalyst is a great resource. Catalyst Council. Top-to-top resources with Catalyst, veterinarian and shelter statistics is a great resource for that. And it gives us a lot of information on how to work together to make a difference. So we're working together for a difference. What a great thought. Examples of things being done across communities across the country. So you can look at that as a resource and say, okay, look, they did this here, and they did this here. Maybe we could do a modification of this. Or maybe it's just enough to give you the fortitude to move forward. I really like that it gives information on how to say it right. They have a whole list of things not to say and say. You know, high kill shelter, that one really sets me off. You know, we didn't set out to do that. You know, that wasn't our mission. You know, we are an open admission shelter. Our mission is to take stray animals in, not to kill them. We do have to euthanize them, but that wasn't our mission. So don't call us that. You know, say vaccine, not shot. You know, just little things like that. And the nice thing about the Catalyst Council is that it provides a sample memorandum of agreement, so you can take that resource and make it fit for you. And then again, it's a good read. You know, it gives you good reads on animal care issues. So I guess I really want to end this by saying, here are some final thoughts for y'all. Animals are at risk here. You guys see the numbers. I passed the handouts around. You know, 200,000 animals in Michigan. 100,000 of those will not have a live outcome. That's the bottom line. 70,000 of those will be cats. 30,000 will be dogs. Many of the dogs, not all, will be pit bull type dogs. Okay. So animals are at risk. There's no doubt about it. Here in our state, here in our own communities. And our goal is to create a world with no more homeless pets. And I know you're all thinking, well, we should all be singing Kumbaya now. Well, that's not the point. I mean, it's a goal that we work towards. My hope, my thought is that we have been sitting at this 5 million, 4.95 billion number since the mid-90s. I think that we've exceeded critical mass, and we're going to see that number change again. And my goal, my hope, is that big part of that will not be driven necessarily by the large national organizations, but maybe by the veterinarian, maybe by groups like MVMA or AVMA. In order to do that, we've got to work together. We are the solution, along with the rescues and the shelters, and we really just need to all get along.